We've got the people who created the problem now pretending they have the answers. Let's bring a little bit of scholarship and intellect to the issue. Michael McLaren, you're the scholarship and the intellect. What do you make of it?
Well, I think you've summed up the statistics nicely. To the politics of it, if we could, just for a second. I mean, Daniel Andrews, as you know, has declared a state of disaster. He should have declared a state of disaster in his own administration probably 3 months ago, because clearly it's the returned arrivals and the so-called hotel quarantine which has been the catalyst for the outbreak, which has, in their mind, necessitated these changes. So, as you say, you've got the people that instigated the problem are now saying we've got the answers. But, of course, in all of this, and maybe the Victorian opposition are using the old Napoleon dictate, don't interrupt your enemy when he's making a mistake. But there hasn't been much said from the other side, and maybe some of that's to do with, oh, well, we're all in this
just a moment,
together.
I have to say. But, I mean, answer this for me. The Prime Minister is in lockstep with Daniel Andrews.
Yeah.
He supports him. We're all Melburnians now, but Andrews was offered up to 1,000 experienced Defence Force personnel to oversee the arrival of travellers from overseas, and they're in forced isolation for 14 days. He rejected the offer, put his mates in.
And, of course, I guess we are all in this together because we're all going to be paying for this now, Alan. I mean, this is the national economic story.
But no effective supervision by the Victorian Health Department and the Commonwealth officials. They were excluded from any involvement.
That's ridiculous. Now, there should have been far greater insistence from Scott Morrison that they follow the line that New South Wales and Queensland took, because it worked. But they had other ideas, and, of course, now we're all going to pay for it. And as for this we're all in it together mantra, how is it that the Victorian government decided it would be a sensible idea to grant a 2% pay rise when the private sector's gone to the wall to 50,000 public servants? I mean, how are we all in this together?
Well, how are we in it together when a young consular official lands in Sydney, doesn't go into quarantine, is allowed to fly to Queensland? He's tested positive. Now Anastasia Palaszczuk is worried what the impact is. We're all in it together. Why didn't he go into quarantine?
There's different rules for different people, isn't there? And this is where the confusion in the public becomes difficult, because more and more people are saying, do I wear a mask, don't I wear a mask? Well, they don't know, because there's no... In New South Wales, for example, there's a recommendation, well, look, if you feel like you should, maybe you should. And if businesses don't want to let you in, well, we won't get stuck into the myth. But there's no body saying, this is the rule, this is what you do until this date.
But you see, you can't have a coffee, you can't take a friend out after 8 o'clock at night. No. See, Michael, I'm not a kind of person that gets depressed. I'm, I suppose, an optimist in most things. But I can't help but be genuinely worried about people who go to bed at night. There wouldn't be 2% of businesses. There wouldn't be 1% of businesses that didn't have a mortgage. No. So they go to bed at night with the mortgage under their pillow, knowing when they wake up tomorrow, because of these people and because of the appalling management of this, and as I said, 43 people in intensive care, 43 out of a population of 25 million, and they go to bed knowing that tomorrow they're not going to make a quid, or the next day or the next day, and the mortgage has to be paid. I mean, it seems to me that we've got people who've got no business experience, health advice has been given without any regard for the consequences on the economy of what they're advising, and lemming-like, the politicians have followed, and then the media have followed.
And you spoke beautifully earlier, Alan, about the mental health side of this. And, of course, we talk about people who die of COVID-19 and people who die with it. Yeah. I think we now have to start including in those statistics of with it these people that are dying as a result of the decisions, including the mental health decisions.
And then fine them $1,600. How do you pay a bloody fine when you've been put out of work and put out of business? I understand, Michael, that doctors are complaining about health bureaucrats in Victoria discouraging them, the doctors, from testing family members or work colleagues of people with the virus unless they show symptoms. I mean, in other words, the doctors are complaining at health officials. They've completely lost the plot. Let's bring in here Tim Smith, who's the only bloke from the opposition in Victoria who seems to be prepared to get into the ring against these people. Remember that Victoria represents 23% of GDP. Yep. And here we've got children's education sacrificed. We're not told who died with it. We're not told who died from it. And the federal government, as I said, learnt the message allegedly from Newmarch in New South Wales, but hasn't transposed that message to Victoria. Tim Smith, good evening to you. Can you please tell us what's going on down there? And is the opposition asleep at the wheel or just prepared to fall into line with Daniel Andrews?
Well, Alan, I can speak for myself and my colleagues. We have been calling out each and every one of the some of the most ridiculous decisions that has ever been seen in peacetime history in Australia. I mean, this is the greatest public administration failure in our country's history. I've been calling this out for months. I was on Sydney radio this morning. I was on Melbourne radio mid-morning. I have been shouting from the rooftops that Daniel Andrews and his gang of 8 ministers are criminally negligent in what they've done to Victoria's economy and indeed to Australia's economy. And they do have blood on their hands.
Okay, now just supposing...
But by their negligence, they've caused the deaths of people and the mental health impacts of hundreds of thousands of people.
No doubt.
Losing their jobs.
No doubt. 100% correct, and everybody watching you agrees with that. Now, Tim, just explain this. You become Premier tonight. There's 3 things you would do in order. What are they?
Alan, firstly, we need to make sure that everyone with coronavirus is kept away from everyone that doesn't have coronavirus. So that means that the 6,000 active cases are managed in such a way that they are kept at home. Now, if that means that we have to put people in ankle bracelets, if we have to, frankly, place guards out the front of their house or ensure that they're quarantined in a hotel at their own expense to make sure that they don't interact with anyone else, well, then that's what we have to do, because that's the pinch point of this whole debacle, frankly.
But there were 6,000 people positively tested at the weekend and they checked up on 600. What happens to the other 5,400?
Very good point. And so that's why we have been so frustrated about the lack of the use of the ADF. Andrews refused to use them. Now he's bringing them in. The resources are there. They just have to be deployed appropriately.
OK, point 2.
And that goes to the next point, contact tracing. Our contact tracing here in Victoria is a debacle. For whatever reason, New South Wales has got this down pat. They have essentially, they can tell you where each and every one of their cases contracted the virus. In Victoria, literally, there are 1,000+ people where the government has absolutely no idea. So I would like to see whoever is in control of contact tracing in New South Wales brought to Victoria to explain to our people how on earth you're meant to do it.
Yep.
And thirdly, federal intervention immediately. We need Brendan Murphy, who's now the Secretary of the Federal Department of Health, and indeed the Army, brought in to ensure that Victoria has got all the resources it needs to get on top of this virus.
But Tim, Scott Morrison, I would have thought someone like Scott Morrison would have pushed Andrews into the corner and given him a great whack. Scott Morrison's telling the nation to support Daniel Andrews. I mean, let's bring Michael in again here. What do you make of all of this? They're as one.
Well, there is unity. There's this idea, isn't there, Alan?
The National Cabinet, see, that's where it goes unstuck,
not
and Parliament not sitting.
Not enough scrutiny there.
No.
But also, there's this idea that, well, because we're all in this together, we've all got to sort of have each other's back. But when someone's making a blatant mistake, as the Victorian authorities
over and over again,
and a multi-billion-dollar mistake, not to mention the lives, someone's got to say, hang on, look, we're all in this together, but you've got to change tack. But to go to Tim Smith again, I mean, this is where I think the opposition needs to be more resolute. I think they've been a little bit tongue-tied.
Let's just go to him, because I want to ask Tim. I mean, Josh Frydenberg is a Victorian MP. Scott Morrison, they've heard you. You've been outspoken. You're saying change tack, new strategies are needed. Do they talk to you? Do they ring you? Have you spoken to them?
Well, of course I speak to them, because they're good friends and colleagues. And look, if I could defend my federal colleagues on these matters, I mean, on the 23rd of March, I think it was, when the New South Wales government and the Victorian government basically unilaterally one Sunday decided they were going to close down up to 90% of their economies. Well, they were walked back from the cliff, so to speak, by Morrison, to his great benefit. And, I mean, the Commonwealth has its hands tied by the Constitution. I mean, I said last week the Victorian government should refer its emergency management powers to Canberra, because I had no confidence in Daniel Andrews to be able to get us out of this mess. But what I'm trying to say is, Alan, the feds have got this thing called the Constitution that kind of prevents them from getting involved here on the ground. And that's where, I mean, essentially, the states have the Victorian government wants to close down almost the entire...
Tim, now let me just take both of you back to March 15, when the Prime Minister addressed the nation. And on March 15, he said, for 8 out of 10 people, it will be nothing more than a bad flu. For the rest, the vulnerable, we've got to look after. Now, what's happened to the 8 out of 10? They've been shoved in with everybody else. Businesses have been shoved in with those that have got it. The old have been shoved in with the young. I mean, Morrison, it seems to me, and those people advising him, lost direction in terms of what he said on the 15th of March. And that is borne out by the statistics. The World Health Organization says 99% of the cases are mild. Now, Tim, it seems to me we should have been long ago isolating the vulnerable and letting other people get on with their life.
Well, isolating the vulnerable, but particularly isolating the people that actually have coronavirus. I mean, making sure that the people that have it don't interact with anyone else. Yep. And then obviously we get to the absolute, then we get to the greatest catastrophe of the whole thing, which is hotel quarantine, where we see people, security guards are sleeping with the guests.
All right, look, you go. You're doing a terrific job. Keep talking. Someone eventually will listen, Tim. It's to your great credit.
Alan.
You showed a lot of energy. I just want to come back to you, though, Michael, for getting all of this sort of stuff. I mean, a Liberal government would argue the virtue of personal responsibility.
Yes.
Where that's gone out the window now, liberties have been taken away from people. Why do we now feel dependent on the government for income, job keeper, job seeker, job something else? Everyone's got their hand out. How do we get back to the point where you are responsible for your well-being, you're responsible for your health, the vulnerable, the aged and the elderly, we look after them, and that's what the Royal Commission into Aged Care says. It's a measure of the dignity of a nation that it can look after, and if it can't, that's a shame. But where has personal responsibility come in all of this? Everyone's got their hand out to government, everyone's taking the directions from government, and we're in this colossal mess, and I just can't see it's a bog we can't get out of.
Well, the fear is surely that we're creating a mindset among some that have never really interacted with the welfare state, that it's going to be there to support them from cradle to grave, and particularly the young. I mean, you look at this enormous bonus payment that has been given to people that might have worked 2 or 3 days a week at the chicken shop. They're now earning what people working 5 days a week in the minimum wage got for working. And the mindset might start with some that welfare state's not bad. So
that's it.
We've got to claw that back because that could be septic.
I was speaking to a young bloke today. He said exactly that. The mindset is there's nothing wrong with it. The government look after me.
Well, a whole bunch of restaurants.
That's it.
Spoke to a couple of them. They said, we can't get the people back.
Talk to you. Keep at it. I wanted to talk to you, though, about the fact that cherry picker and all the rest of it, they can't get workers.
That's the story, isn't it?
They can't get workers.
Jobs.
They're offering $400 a day and they can't get anyone to do the job. There are jobs in regional Australia available at the fruit picking time, citrus and whatever, and if they can't get the workers, it'll stay on the vine. If it stays on the vine, fruit in the supermarket goes up in price.
And we go hungry.
We go hungry. Good on you. Good to talk to you. You can't beat scholarship. This bloke's got it and he's smart.